Hello, I'm back. I just need to adjust myself a bit there. I haven't got much hair left, but I don't want that box taking off what little I've got. I've got more hair on my eyebrows than over my head nowadays. Well, welcome back. As you can see, we're continuing from last week's lecture. I've not left the office. I've had my cup of coffee and I've got my nice cold water. Drink. It could be something else, you never know, do you? So let's have a look at the issues of conflict and negotiation. Negotiation comes into everything you do. You could negotiate when you have a job interview, you're negotiating. When you want a pay rise, you're negotiating. If you've got girlfriends, boyfriends, whatever, you're negotiating all the time, aren't you? I know you are. I do. 37 years of it. But also if you're offering your services in the commercial world, you'll negotiate. Even in a tender situation where you've responded to a tender, there'll still be some negotiation. If they select you and then have a pre-contract meeting, they'll negotiate with you there. Bear in mind, negotiation isn't just about money. It can include the scope of the work you're going to do. And in many sectors, the scope is not fully understood by a client. So there's an element of you educating them, which is negotiation again, really. So as we have a little look, just before we start, we've got the lovely word cloud, and it's got all those words that we need to know in there. It's got compromise, agreement, communication, problem, solution, dispute. Hopefully we avoid dispute. Balance. Negotiation should be a balance between the two. Tolerance. I mean, just have a look at the words there because they're all quite helpful for you. Let me try and zoom back away from that. And here's the negotiation thing I showed you last week. Okay, and this up here is quite a good quotation which ties in with the millennials that we talked about last week being very connected to their electronic communication systems. And this, look up Simon, Google Simon, he's got some interesting things to say. I'm going to read this word for word as well. Trust is not formed through a screen. It's formed across a table. It takes a handshake to bind humans, and no technology yet can replace that. There is no such thing as virtual trust. Interesting point there from Simon, no virtual trust. I mean, obviously that's deeply hurtful for me because you obviously don't trust me since I'm a virtual thing. You never get to meet me. Hopefully using Teams and being able to talk directly live to each other, and that helps a little bit. But I'm the first to say that lecturing via the internet solely is considerably worse than face-to-face. It's amazing how well we can do when we're all in a room together. But we try the best we can with this, and that's why I try to make myself available as much as I possibly can by running that Teams app on my smartphone. Unfortunately, I'm not a smart user, but I do have a smartphone. Oh, look, I've got one. See, look. Hang on, I've got it. I have a smartphone. Look, I've got a smartphone. You can see when I'm recording. You see? Actually, I don't know much what it does, to be honest. So that's enough of that. So let us get interested in this conflict. So I really don't want to linger on the conflict too much, but you do need to be aware of it because the other party to your negotiation may come from the old school thinking it this way, or it could have conflict internally within your work organisation when you're trying to negotiate. You certainly get it when you've been married for as many years as me. So some of the conflicts, they can be beneficial, they can help you out a lot. And conflict, according to the text that we keep using, is really necessary to create creativity and improvement. I mean, basically, as I've said a few times before, especially with certain organisations, government ones being particularly coming to mind, where they appoint staff who are clones of what they've already got. If you've got clones, you don't get any conflict. Well, that's the way it goes, but I've seen plenty of conflict between clones. So conflict can actually bind a group together. Now, obviously not at the time of the conflict, but as they come together to sort of make up and have a hug and agree on the way forward, it can bring them together more. They begin to understand each other's points of view. Conflicts can motivate certain members of a group to be concerned for the organisation. I do apologise for the American spellings you keep seeing. That's why some are underlined red, because they're English spellings and it doesn't recognise the S's and not the Z's. But it can, some people can see the conflict and get concerned for the organisation, and that can spur them on to try and improve the situation and solve the conflicts. Conflict can create creativity. People try to find ways around the conflict, to avoid the conflict or minimise. It can be very creative sometimes, and it can lead to innovation as well. Especially if the conflict's external, it can lead to innovation, as we've seen in the information technology sphere over the last 20 odd years, with Apple versus Microsoft and all that lot. Conflict does promote change. You've got conflict, you can't go back to the status quo, because the conflict remains, so there has to be some change. And conflict can lead to high quality decisions. It can also lead sometimes to really poor decisions, but generally you get really good high quality decisions from it. There are 5 styles to manage conflict. So we're having a bit of a biffy up there, you can see, typical conflict. You could be competing with each other, or you could collaborate. You could try to not fight and collaborate. You can reach compromise. Probably the most common one is the compromise. Avoiding conflict, I wouldn't recommend it. If you avoid it, then whatever's simmering in the underground is going to still be there and will probably fester. And you can accommodate the conflict. You actually might have particular times when conflict's allowed. I know of one organisation that on a Friday afternoon they all used to go off and play paintball and get rid of the conflict that way. I never went for that. I wanted real ammunition, I did. So that's the intro to conflict. And you all know conflict different ways. Hopefully we're talking about the social and the psychological conflict, not the physical. Okay? Now, negotiation. Now, really good negotiators. They're brilliant writers, they're fantastic orators, they can speak really well, and they're great with their hands, their body language, their performance. It's actually a performance that we're trying to do. Unfortunately, I can perform, but I can't do it on such a small screen because I've still not lost weight from last week. Oh no, today's the day. Oh well, don't worry. And the really goodies. They're conscientious. They're assertive, but they're assertive from a position of knowledge, and the communications are brilliant. And they are generally, and a really good negotiator is flexible. They're creative. They can come around with new ideas. They're aware of themselves and others, so they're aware of their own limitations and their strengths, and they're aware of their opponent or the others. They're aware of their needs and shortcomings and restrictions. So they're aware, they've done research into this, so they know. They're very good planners. So they've already planned where they're going to go because they assume they're going to be successful, and their plans will allow for flexibility for what happens in the actual negotiation. Really, really important point is they're honest. They do not misrepresent things. They do not promise stuff they can't do. They do not lie. They are honest. And they're always looking for a win-win situation. So they need to win. Whatever they're negotiating, they need to win it. But they want the other party to feel as if they've won as well. Because if that's the case, you get a win-win. You've got ownership of the outcome. Both sides are happy that they own it. Okay? And they're equal partners. And you've got to have really good communications. They're great communicators, both body language, verbally, written, email, presentation style. They're really good at it. You can go for prefer a passive or an aggressive or an assertive style? Well, that very much depends on what you're negotiating and who with. Aggressive, I wouldn't go for aggressive personally, but the passive, the negotiators, the communicators, they use ambiguous language. Okay, they're underconfident in their presentation. They seem a little bit, susceptible maybe, and they give in to demands far too easily. Okay, so they're lacking confidence. They're lacking knowledge in their product, we'll call it. They don't have internal confidence, so they probably shouldn't be negotiating, really. I mean, they would be more useful as a counsellor of some type, I would suggest. Then you've got the aggressive communicators who are confrontational. The way people used to think all negotiations are confrontational. That really puts everybody's backs up. Negotiations will collapse rapidly, and you will start to generate a bad image and reputation. Okay, so assertive is probably the way to go. Under control, of course, you've got to control it. They're confident, these negotiators or communicators, they're confident, but they're considerate of the other party. They'll keep a decision, they'll keep a discussion going, and they'll actually try to find a mutually acceptable outcome. This is the win-win approach coming through. They're strong, good tone of voice, but they remain factual. They don't get emotional, and they're certainly not critical of the other party. Okay, they're trying to build a partnership and a relationship going here, because they may be looking at the negotiation, they may be looking at it not as a one-off, but as a long-term relationship, which is what I used to do when I ran my own consultancies. I'd be very flexible with the clients I liked to work for, and they knew it, and it was reciprocal. Okay, an example would be, I did a lot of work for a couple of in Australia. I've done a lot of work for a couple of large government department, and I've done a couple of large big councils, and those projects were really for doing condition and compliance assessments of their entire portfolio, everything from the public toilet to the town hall, and they would get part of the offer was, if I'm successful with this, then I want an office, I want a desk in the organisation, so I get seen daily, I meet people, I learn stuff, and I've got access to the records as I need them. And once they get their head around that and see the outcomes of it, they ask for it whenever they go out to tender to anybody else, because it's just partnering. So I'll go off the side a little bit there. So because they're factual, they're critical. They'll describe, as it says down here, their views. They always start the sentence with I, and they don't direct it to you. It's I or we. It's inclusive. Okay. Some people do it naturally, some people don't. There are some things that you don't want to do when you're negotiating. Don't confuse negotiation with confrontation. That's a very old-fashioned term. It's not. You're there for mutual benefit. Okay? So it's not a confrontation. You've got to be professional. You've got to be patient. You've got to be calm. You've got to show empathy. I know they're all touchy-feely words, but fair enough. I came from a time when I loved Star Trek, and then Star Trek: The Next Generation came out, and guess who used to be on the bridge of a starship? They had a counsellor. Touchy-feely. So we're not going that far, but you've got to be empathetic with your other party. Don't become emotional, whatever you do. It's a negotiation. Okay? Stick to what you're negotiating. Don't make it personal at all. Don't have a go at the other person. And if there's negotiations going on with other service providers, not just you, don't slag them off. Okay? Don't get angry, frustrated. You've got to keep all that under control. All right? We mentioned that under the professional traits and that a few weeks ago. You've got to keep emotion out of the business arena. Okay? You can't think straight as well if you start getting emotional. My aircon's not working too well today again, as it wasn't last time. And do not blame the other party if you can't come to a conclusion, if you can't get what you want. Don't blame them. That just means you don't understand them, and they don't understand you, and you haven't found the common ground. You don't understand what drives each of you. Okay, so more work needs to be done, and that comes into research and that on each other before you actually start to negotiate. Clarity of expression, but there are things you do. Okay, you've got to be clear. You've got to know exactly what you're offering, and you've got to know exactly what they need. And I did mention last week that sometimes clients don't understand what they're asking for. I mean, I take that from the due diligence and the condition and compliance assessment environment. When large clients, council departments, government departments, etc., go out to tender for a condition assessment, but they don't understand exactly what that is. And, as I go off on a tangent here, most consultants, when they do condition assessment type work, and it's probably the same for lots of others, use a proprietary software system to collect the data, analyse the data, and report the data. Now, they don't all use the same one, and they're not all interchangeable. They don't all produce the same outcome, which can produce a problem. And the client needs to be made aware of this, and the client needs to be made aware of what is and isn't included. And the client doesn't know, so there's a bit of education there. Some clients I've left and now know what they're doing, and they upset everyone when they go to tender because they ask for what I used to provide, and no one else wants to do that because it's uneconomic apparently. Into your negotiations, you've got to be well prepared for this. Okay, you've got to be prepared. You've got to have researched everything. You've got to know your service, your product. You've got to know how they use it and what they want to do with it and why they need to do this. Always think of the other party. Always think of the other party. Okay, what do they need out of the deal? Now, if you're dealing with, I'll stick to my condition things that I know well. If it's a state government department, they need value for money, and they literally always go for the lowest tender figure, which isn't always the best thing to do, by the way. Okay, so you might have to compromise with them in what they're asking for and what you're going to provide for the money. Always be consistent, all right? Don't keep changing. Be honest with expectations and objectives, all right? Be very honest with them, be upfront with them and transparent. You need guidelines on how you're going to negotiate, what stages there are to it. You've got to ensure that the other party sticks to them. So this would be communicated to each other and agreed on before you actually meet. All right, so you'd have an agenda with the set items in it that you're going to go through. Okay, effective communication goes without saying, doesn't it? Really, positive body language. I mean, if I'm going to do one of these things, I always had a suit and a shirt. If it was a government department, I'd have a tie on, but it wouldn't stay on long. If it wasn't, then I'd just look smart without the tie on. But the jacket would come off quite quickly, and I'd be very eloquent. I'd be quite animated. I'd always be asking for feedback questions and pinpointing things. You've got to be really, really good about the communication side of it. Your presentation has to be really good. I mean, I like using this Prezi instead of PowerPoint because you can see my little fat face on one side, and it's a little bit more engaging, maybe. You let me know if you think it is or not. You've got to be ready to compromise. Now, if you've done your research properly, you probably already know where you might have to compromise and might have already developed what that compromise offer could be. Okay, but you've got to be able to think on your feet as well. So one thing is the negotiator nowadays doesn't normally have the full delegation to make decisions, and they have to go back to the hierarchy and that. So that can slow down negotiations a little bit, in which case you'd have to be quite careful what you offered and said. You're looking for that win-win. Okay, so mutual beneficial outcomes. Win-win. You might need to take legal advice. Something might come up, and I'm not talking about confrontationally. A question may come up from one of the parties that the other party is,
I'm going to have to find out about that. That's never been asked before. I'm not sure what the implications are going to be on that one. I'll have to go back to the GHD we used to have in-house legal advice. I have to go back and ask them about this, and then I can come back to you. And I suggest that when I come back to you, you do the same thing, because we've got to be on the same level table here. It's not a bad thing to do. Ask questions. We always say when we're lecturing, there's no such thing as a stupid question. Obviously, if you do your research on your product you're offering and the client, then you're probably going to avoid those because you're working out the right questions you want to ask. Pay attention to the details. I like to record the meetings, but most clients don't like you to do that, even though you're offering to give them a copy of it so that they know what was said and how it was said. If you can video them, I mean, that's one benefit of these video conference things, because they're recorded. They do show a bit of body language. They do show the expressions on the face, which can mean much more than what's actually said. So I'm looking at my screen here. I'm not looking at it. It can be a bit creepy if I stare at your camera. Eye contact, very important. Okay, and everything must be recorded in writing and confirmed. Okay, I said a few weeks ago, a friend of mine, he's a barrister, I think he is now. He always tells me when things get to court, it's the party with the best records that tends to win. So record everything. There are strategies you can take when you negotiate. Depends on who you're negotiating with and what you're negotiating over. But there's the problem-solving strategy, and this would have been set out before you start. When you're working out your agenda and everything, you may not use these words so definitively, but it would be implied which one of these you're going. Maybe you wouldn't comply the inaction and the yielding, but problem-solving. So both sides, they're committed. They're committed to coming out with a win-win. All right. A lot of that happens in construction nowadays. So that's quite a good one, especially design and build contracts and things. Maybe not so much with subcontractors and head contractors, but contending. So this is where you try to persuade the other party to concede to what your outcome is, your goal. That normally is just a win-lose situation, but it does suit certain types of stuff. Negotiation, yielding. You might, obviously in good negotiations, this will happen from both sides. You concede a point, but it's not central, it's not vital, okay, to the other party. You're really playing a bit of psychology with them at this one, but it keeps negotiations going. Your research would have highlighted these, hopefully. You can compromise. Now, this happens quite often. Yeah, unless you're negotiating with someone who's a bit... Government departments come back to mind again because they're inflexible, really, due to their leadership style, if you go back and look. Both of the parties have accepted before they start that they're not going to get the perfect outcome. They're not going to achieve their perfect goals. Of course, unless they've got bottomless pits of money and pay ridiculous fees, they might get close to it. So they'll actually settle for a compromise, which is okay to both sides, but not as good as they both wanted. And then there's inaction. You may not be able to come to an agreement there, so you just agree to back off and go and do more information gathering and more research, and maybe you have informal knowledge exchanges, so you understand the service and each other better. Then you'd go back, but the inaction is only a short term. Otherwise, if you stop negotiating, it's not negotiation full stop, it's a foul. Planning. This is what I've been mentioning this all the way through here. You've got to plan your negotiations before you get started. You need to know what your objectives are going to be before you walk into that room. Okay, you need to understand them very clearly. You need to have the research there, you need to know where you can compromise, etc. Okay, you need to know what you're going to do if the negotiations become too complex or they fail. Negotiations fail reasonable amount of time. They succeed a lot more, obviously, but those that fail, you can normally go back and look at them and you can find out why they failed, and they shouldn't have failed, really. Okay, there could be an issue. You need to know what your needs are, and you need to know the other party's needs. You need the empathy as well. You've got values. We talked about values, your honesty and all that sort of stuff. And your values could also include profit margins and delivery times and that sort of stuff. You need to know what they are, and you need to know the importance of them. You need to rank them in importance, and then you can identify which ones are a bit less important that you might be able to, be flexible on, or maybe consider. But if you don't rank them, you don't know which aren't that important. You need to analyse the other negotiating party. Okay, you want to know what their objectives are. You want to know what information they need. You want to know how they're going to use your service. It goes on, but you need to analyse them, and that's part of your research. Okay, you're going to research the other party. Hopefully you can find historical examples of a similar negotiation or a similar product or service before, and you can find out how that went. Quite often clients in my condition, inspection, due diligence field are extremely cagey and private about previous projects, which is completely the wrong thing to do, because we could just make the same mistakes again. We're not learning from previous. Even a successful project we can learn from. So you need to research and ask your colleagues, ask your mentors, ask your older people who've been there and done it before. Ask any members of staff that have dealt with this negotiating client before. They might have negotiated with them or been involved with them in a previous job. They've brought that information with them. So use everything you can about them. Rehearse the negotiation. So get a few people in the office in there, tell them to play devil's advocate, tell them what goals they're going for. Don't tell them what you're going for, that's to start with. And then you have a dry run and see how it goes. Then you tell them what your goals are and see what happens then. You'll find they'll probably, unless someone's having a bit of an arsey day, they'll probably be a little bit more accepting of you. But practice makes perfect, especially with people, as we said, the millennial thing last week, who are not so used to dealing face to face on a personal level, maybe uncomfortable standing up in front of even 3 or 4 people. I mean, I've stood up in front of over 1,000 people. Little story here. When I first went into lecturing, I did it years ago, when I was studying my master's degree. I got a job at university in Britain. I'd never lectured before in front of a group. In fact, I'd hardly ever stood, and most people I'd ever stood up in front of was about 8 in project meetings. And I turned up, and it was the orientation week sort of thing, and we had all the students and all their parents were all there, and they just said to me, could you just give a 5-minute talk about building surveying for everybody? We've got someone doing architecture and quantity surveying, but we'd like someone to talk about building surveying. Okie dokie. So go through the door, up the steps at the back, walk out on the stage, and remember, I'd only ever stood in front of about 8 people or so before in a small room, and now I walk on the stage, and there in front of me are 800 people in a theatre. And I was like, oh, bit of stage fright maybe. So we went up to the lectern. It was a lectern in the middle of full stage, nothing else there, just I was introduced, I stood there, I just thought, oh dear. And I'd only been there a couple of days. I didn't know the background to the Pacific degree course. I just knew my profession. Right. Well, thank you for that. That was a glowing introduction, wasn't it? Well, this is my 2nd or 3rd day here, and I didn't know so many people lived here. They're all like, so, well, it's all right. I don't know how many want to be a building surveyor. How many? Any hands? And a few. Okay, so the rest are architects then. And everyone said, ooh, really? I said, great, building surveyors look at the architects because they create your work for you. They make the mistakes that we correct. And there was a bit of laughter going on.
I said, apart from that, and then I just went through it all, and I got a bit more comfortable. I got a few little chuckles out the audience, especially from the parents. Made a few jokes. Then I did what no one else had done. I did a question and answer. I said, "Has anybody got any questions?" And people would stand up. And my 5-minute review of building surveying turned into 35 minutes, and I just came off and thought, "Oh, that wasn't too bad, was it?" I have done stand-up comedy in the comedy club as well, by the way, but that's very inappropriate. So I'm just saying, you've got to get used. That's the rehearsal. Write an agenda, mentioned that earlier, so all those topics and all the participants and everything you go through is there, logical order for them to know what's going on so they can prepare, and then pick a nice location. I mean, everyone has to be comfortable, and have a schedule of what you're going to do. But the location's good. You need to provide, drinks, maybe a few nibbles. Everyone has to be comfy, okay? So that's what you need to plan. You've got to engage with these people as well. So introduce yourself. As I just gave that little story of being dumped in front of a theatre, you've got to be articulate and stick to the agenda, okay? And you've got to be calm and confident. And even when you're negotiating, when you know everybody's on your side and there's no reason you can't have an appropriate joke now and then, So then you propose, you make your offer, you explain what you're offering, and the other party will then comment upon it and clarify what their proposals are, what they need out of this. Normally you don't accept the first offer, because there's always some negotiation and leeway in there, even if it only turns out to be clarification to avoid later problems. It says evidence suggests those negotiators that take the first proposal are never as satisfied, and they regret doing it so quickly later on. Probably because when they get back to the office, the boss goes, "You what?" Make sure you understand the proposal of the other party, which could be the tender. I don't know. Remember your objectives. Discuss concepts and ideas. Discuss that. Discuss the ability, the infrastructure needed. Whatever it is, be open with it. Okay. Consider reasonable compromises that your research should have pre-warned you that you might have to make. Try and get concessions. If you compromise, you want a concession to balance it out. Really. Come up with alternative proposals. Offer them up and see what happens. Paraphrase the other party's suggestion so that you clarify you understood what they said and they think that you're actually being part of your team. It's a psychological connection you're trying to make. And remember to give and take. Okay? Straightforward stuff. And when you want to finish your negotiation, called closing, you just quickly recap all your objectives. Okay, and when you're happy with them, you're negotiating. There are signals. Really good negotiators and salesmen can spot these. But with practice, you can do this. You're looking for the closing signals. Okay, so the other side, they're running out of arguments. They're running out of counter arguments. They're running out of questions. They look tired. They're physically difficult to do over the internet and that, but they look tired. So they're I've had enough of this. They might be yawning or whatever. They're getting a bit fidgety because I want to go somewhere else. And the negotiation, your positions, them and you, are actually getting really close together. And it's only the minute stuff you're talking about now. That's a good sign you're going to come to an agreement and close. When you get to that point, you then confirm and articulate what the agreement is, confirm the concessions that have already been made and agreed upon, and then you just make your final statements. And normally that would start with, that would work. What we've got, that would work. All right, let's sign the contract. When do we start? So you switch into being positive and enthusiastic. All the agreements must be in writing as soon as possible. Even if it's only a letter of intent before the legal bods and that write the whole thing up. Needs to be done there, signed by the right people, of course. And then follow up as quickly as you can on any commitments you made.
Okay, and the same goes from them. So maintaining social relationships really comes down to this Generation Y millennial technology issue, which we now have to consider. Okay, so nothing's perfect, all right? So remember that. Everything's a bit of a mess. Everything is, especially my lectures can be a mess sometimes. But relationships are complex and the outcomes are uncertain and people are irrational. I'm definitely irrational if I haven't had a drink. And that is a nice quote from Hugh. You can look him up as well. Employees, that's us doing the work. If we've got a good relationship with each other and that, we've got high morals. We engage with our work really well. We're satisfied at work. We make suggestions and we're supportive. If we've got good relationships, which can be difficult to get when you don't actually meet up. Professional relationships used to be taken for granted, really. When we did it without knowing we were doing it, we would, as I said, we'd have a drink or have a meal or go and do something, and we were always face to face and talking about things, which builds up a rapport. Much more difficult nowadays if you're all in separate offices and you're all talking the way we do now. So don't ignore this. You can't ignore it as happening by chance anymore. There are some fundamental requirements for building these relationships. You've got to be respectful. Okay? Interesting to note that fear of your superior, fear of your manager, you're fearful of them, is not respect. It's conditional training to be frightened of them. Okay? Effective communication. Now, that doesn't mean you're fluent in speaking a particular language, but it includes body language and how you listen to people and observe them and how you present information, how you write. I mean, I'll just have here. It's a really useful little book. I can't remember how much it is, but it's a really useful little book. So, is that the price on the back there? Now, I can't see the price. It's probably grossly expensive. All these textbooks are. But see if you can find that in the library or something similar to it. There's probably those dummy books about writing business stuff. You've got to maintain privacy. Someone says so. This comes down to not getting involved in gossip. So they need to know if they talk to you about something, it doesn't go any further. That's very important. You've got to be willing to help out. So you help someone when they need it, even if they don't ask and you can see it, you can offer to help and accept help when it's offered to you, because that builds more respect. And we all have conflict resolution. How do you deal with it? Stay away from the gossips and the rumours. There's no point. Don't get involved in it. If they're talking about it, just ignore it. Make sure that, emotional stuff's not going on in the office, or it's not upsetting your workspace if people are talking about things like that. Okay, so be very careful controlling that stuff. Conflict, yeah, you'll all have conflict with someone at some time in your careers. It's happened a couple of times to me with bosses and things, so, and it's just chalk and cheese sometimes. Oh, let's say, just go back, remember, it's referenced here, and here's the website where you can go and see more details of where that came from. Gender differences when we're negotiating. I can't avoid it. It seems a bit sexist to say this, but it's actually true. It says at the top there, when men and women interact, males tend to talk for longer. If you're married, you don't believe that, but yeah, apparently it's been proven. They talk for longer periods of time, and they interrupt more often. So the men overbear the women. Now, we like to think that there's complete equality nowadays, and I can see that in a lot of places there is equality now. But there are some little vestiges of the old world, and there are some people who won't accept that there's equality on both sides. I'm not making any points here. Men, and this is from research obviously, and it's all at the bottom there, We use direct language, whereas ladies seem to use little softer differential speech patterns, which is natural, but it's not a weakness. Some negotiators will try to make use of that, and that's completely wrong, and that turns into harassment, etc. During personal interactions, men are more likely than women to use really intensive language to persuade others. Could be overbearing, could be almost threatening at times. Women are also more effective using this approach, so it works both ways. Okay? Females, they employ language containing more disclaimers. So I know. Is that showing a lack of confidence? Because I know plenty of lady professionals that certainly don't do that. They may do it when they start, I suppose. Depends on their family background, their cultural background, and that. But I know a few very close friends who are women, and I wouldn't want to negotiate with them. But that tends to make people think that women are less forceful, which is completely wrong, and that's a mistake that they will regret. But it's good to know these things are existing there. Typical stereotypes for negotiation. This is stereotypes of men, women. Men are believed to be rational and logical, whereas women are emotional, but they are definitely more intuitive. They've got more empathy. They're better at reading body language, I would think. And once you know the strengths and weaknesses of yourself, whether you're a man or a woman, you could embrace those and use them to your advantage. Generally, people expect men to emphasise facts, figures, but women on relationships. So women are really, really good at creating partnerships and social groups. They're really good at that. Which is, you can't just go for the facts and everything. You need the social and the empathy part as well. Men tend to be dominant and authoritarian. I don't think I am. Stop it. While women are viewed as passive and submissive. I don't view women that way. My wife has made sure I don't. That's a joke. They're not. And it says in America, you've got male attorneys, solicitors, and business people. They make the mistake sometimes of assuming that women will not use as many negotiating tricks and games as men. They do. They've done the same training courses. They've got the same goals. So why wouldn't they? Quite a few women, apparently, this is not my viewpoint, they assume that other females won't apply Machiavellian tactics. And I really suggest you go and Google. Oh no, we're off Google if they're threatening to leave Australia. I don't know, Firefox, DuckDuckGo, Bing, Explorer, whatever. Machiavellian. It's really interesting. There's some really interesting articles about people with these Machiavellian tactics. It comes from a bloke called, he was a Machiavellian. Machiavelli, he's an Italian, but wait you read a little bit about him. Men and women who expect your female negotiating partner adversary to be less competitive and more cooperative are going to fall flat on their face, basically. It's an expectation that is not founded in fact or research or whatever. Okay? Good female negotiators are just as good as the men. And it should be that way, of course. Resisting these stereotypes. I mean, I'm telling you this so you can change the world a bit and get rid of these stereotypes. So blokes often try to get a psychological advantage if there's an aggressive female. Aggressive female means a confident female on the same level as the bloke. Okay? they're a partner, they're his equal. One of the tactics, and I've seen this so many times, is because the lady's like standing up for herself and knows what thing, they assume she's not feminine. And they'll accuse her of things which I wouldn't record here, but you can guess what they would do. Wrong, and they should be fired for it, really. These men are hoping to embarrass the ladies when they're bargaining. It often bounces back at them 2-3 times more. So the idea is to make them feel self-conscious about using typical negotiation tactics that are traditionally considered to be male, not female. There's no difference now. Female negotiators, look out. Don't let others employ this to belittle you. Okay, work out tactics to counteract it that aren't falling to their low level. Okay, you got to be up here. Don't fall down to the swamp where these people are. Female negotiators, you've got the right to use any technique you want. Doesn't matter. You've gone and done the same MBA maybe, or the same negotiation training as all these people, so you just use it. Forget the stereotype. If you've got male colleagues who keep raising the pointless objections, I think they're on an ethical and then they're also on a disciplinary route nowadays, because that's wrong. I'll leave you with that, but I've had them all my life, because I did my degree with lots of women. I've worked with lots of women. I've had female bosses and female staff under me, training wise. Gender differences in negotiation. This is really simple. Anticipate that there are certain things that will flare up because there's a man and a woman negotiating. Okay? You can find out what they are quite easily. Do your homework on each other and what these differences are and what the triggers are. Be absolutely honest and open and transparent. Okay? We're talking here about compensation and benefits. These two obviously negotiate a pay rise or something. Remember, in Hollywood, we've had all these problems where these fantastic actresses are getting paid so much less than the men. It's completely unacceptable. They're not being remunerated for their skills and performance. It's wrong. And make sure you articulate the performance expectations so that the men and the women, they've got the same expectation. And they're going to be rewarded the same if they achieve them. It's got nothing to do. Well, I was going to say whether you wear trousers or a skirt, but nowadays the men can wear them, can't they, if they're from Scotland? That's a joke. Remember, the jokes are a bit dodgy sometimes. Okay, bargaining types. Bargaining power. It's really important. It's a great basic economic concept. And it's a measure, it's a KPI, key performance indicator you could call it really, of how well parties negotiate and influence each other. What effect, what influence have they got on them? It can be lopsided if you've got a large head contractor, I won't use names, but really big one, negotiating with a little subcontractor. I mean, it's not really even playing field there. So bargaining power is a bit, always really is a little bit warped. And it can be extreme demands followed up by really little concessions, if any. So a bit of bullying, you could argue, high bargaining power could possibly be considered. We're seeing this bargaining power now with these high-tech companies in Australia at the moment. And I agree that all these social media groups, and we've got Facebook and it's Google at the moment that's really being unreasonable and unethical, I think, in my view. They're using the outputs and the news things that someone else has created, and that person's getting no reward for it. They're not giving them any money for it. They're just taking it and presenting it to the world. But the person who worked for it is not getting anything for it. So now Google have turned around. Now the Australian government's got some legislation coming in to force them to do this. They've turned around and said, well, if you do this, we're going to leave Australia. We're going to withdraw the Google search engine, Chrome, So Australians won't be able to get any local information on it. That's if they even let us use it at all, which for me is a problem because I use Google Scholar a lot and I don't see Microsoft's got an equivalent. Although today Microsoft came out and said that they're fully supportive of the Australian market. They will fill the gaps that are left if Google pull out. Facebook are threatening the same thing, by the way. So there's organisations with too much bargaining power. They're too big for their own good. So you do get the extreme demands from them. You've got commitment tactics. Your opponent might tell you that he can't make the decision. His hands are tied, as it says here. He's got limited discretion. Well, you've got to ask the question, well, who has got it? Because we need to negotiate with them. Now, I'd say from their point of view, that comes down to a lack of preparation, a lack of resources, research, and a misunderstanding of their services they're providing or wanting. Otherwise, they would be able to make decisions. There are, and this comes from Harvard. Okay, mentioned at the bottom there. There's the link. In America, they're quite money driven, obviously. They've got these hard bargaining tactics in negotiations. So they've got this skills like leave it negotiation. So you've got these things. You've got inviting unreciprocated offers. You're inviting offers that got no two way to them, trying to make you flinch. They will stand there and they will try to, psychologically and economically hurt you. They use quite commonly, apparently in America, they use personal insults. Not just when a man's dealing with a woman. They'll do it both ways. Try to get you off balance. They'll bluff, they'll puff themselves and say they can do other things, and they'll even lie. Now, we talk about this next week about what's the consequences if you misrepresent yourself in professional ethics. Remember, the lying and the bluffing part is not considered legally acceptable in Australia, and you could get in deep trouble for doing it. They will threaten you and they will warn you about things. That's what Google are doing at the moment, and Facebook to about the same extent maybe. They're belittling your alternatives. Again, Google are belittling Microsoft and the other search engines at the moment. And Google, apparently, when you go into their head office, it actually says on the wall behind the reception, "Do no evil." Really? And they might actually have two negotiators there playing the good bad cop bit and separating the negotiating team. So, and none of those are, I absolutely recommend, totally against using anything like that whatsoever. You would certainly fall foul of Australian consumer law if you did any of that. Integrative negotiation in the building industry. This is where negotiations are trying to evolve. There's two types of negotiation, and there's a little table there. So there's the basis for it, the distributive and the integrative negotiation. Okay, I won't read it because I've got two little bits on the side here. Bargaining, that's the method where instead of being focused on your positions and stuck on your positions, okay, you're looking more at the underlying requirements there. There might be a way to get a win-win scenario. We've talked win-win before, and this is where both sides are happy with the outcome. And that's what the construction industry is trying to strive towards at the moment, the win-win. There is in Moodle, let me have a look. I have Moodle on my other screen just to make sure I tell you. It tells you, where is it? Oh, I've lost it. Oh, well. There is a document about Australian negotiations, etc. I've included it as a file you can download. So your personal research is to go to the bottom of that Moodle week and download it and have a look. Distributive. This is a competitive negotiation strategy, not conflict, but competitive. And it's when we're trying to distribute something that's fixed, i.e. you've only got a certain budget. a certain amount of money or a certain amount of I don't know, widgets, whatever, between two parties. It's also known as the zero sum or the win-lose negotiation, because only one side can really win. There's no benefit to the other side in this one. Generally, this is chosen by competitive communicators, negotiators who are competitive and aggressive, and there's no trust between them. And you'll be surprised how often you come across that. I would again say from personal experience that any type of official government negotiation, starts with a lack of trust. It seems that they always think they're being ripped off. So we don't try, that's no good for construction industry. So we're trying to go for the integrative now. This is collaboration between the offerer and the acceptor, the client, the contractor, whatever, the supplier and the contractor. We're trying to get a win-win for both sides. We're trying to make sure everyone's happy. And a win-win in construction means that the smaller, maybe the supplier or the smaller consultant, doesn't get driven out of business. And if we drive everybody out of business, we get less choice, and you're heading towards duopolies and monopolies, and that's really bad. Okay, it stifles innovation, creativism, and it also gives one side far too much bargaining power to drive prices down too low, and businesses go out of practice. One of the things that big construction firms have done to their suppliers, their subcontractors, is put them on ridiculous payment terms. I mean, I've heard of payment terms of 354 days. So the service provider has got to wait a whole year before they get the money. That's a really extreme example. Normally, it's not uncommon to find 120 days payment terms. No, you want something around 28 days, really, if not a little bit less, depending on the service provided, because the supplier's got cash flow as well. So that's really bargaining power being misused. So we come back to collaborative. All right, the parties, the aims and the goals of both parties are integrated in a way, so there's a combined value for both of them. Now, obviously, a design and construction contract would fall into this, and that's the way you would try to do that. Okay, and your management consultants and things, they would know all this stuff. Basically, we're looking at reaching a mutually beneficial, acceptable outcome. It's not aggressive. We're not trying to result in the extinction of a number of suppliers or clients. Okay, so everyone comes away happy with it. Easier for you to do nowadays, but if you've got some older people like me who might have been, not me, but might have been ingrained in the old methodology, it can be difficult. And one of the issues is when you negotiate and actually come to a deal on this sort of thing, you never really get a pat on the back for doing well with it, and oh, that's fantastic. But you'll get kicked if it goes wrong. So you're too soft on them. So there's a lot of education to go on here. The whole idea of this, it's the concept of value. We're creating value to both parties. We're creating value to society in general. Why would I say that? Well, if we've got a win-win situation, and then the supplier is going to stay in business, he's going to employ more people, good for society. Same thing with the client. That's one way of looking at it. You can look at it in many ways. Okay, so each party's got to get a gain from this and go, oh yeah, I'm happy with this. Two or more issues are normally negotiated at the same time from both sides. They find compromise. There's a lot more reading to do on this one. As always, at the bottom of the box, there is the reference where it came from. You'll have to type it into your box and find out. That would appear to be the end of this lecture. Thank God for that. I'm getting a sore throat. I've been talking too long. Again, as always, do your own research. Anything you find, put it in the teams. Put it in week 5 of the teams, so everybody can have a look and comment on it, and then they'll come down with what they've found. Remember, I keep saying this to you. You are not in competition with each other. You are helping each other. Okay, I'm here to facilitate you, because I can't possibly give you all the information you need, and you've all got different viewpoints, which I'm very supportive of.
So share away and we'll talk about it at the tutorial. Okay? I hope you found this one enjoyable. I was going to tell you a joke, but I can't find one. So I'll do that next week. So thank you very much for coming. Ta-ta.